This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Today on the podcast, my brother Neil makes his triumphant return to the Moonlight Graham Show as we break down the best Iowa baseball players to come out of the state since Bob Feller. Of course, Iowa has a really rich tradition of baseball history. So many great players have come from a lot of the small towns in Iowa. In the first half of the 20th century, you had Hall of Famers like Cap Anson, Fred Clark, Dave Bancroft, Bob Feller, Red Faber. But since Bob Feller retired in 1956, the state of Iowa has not produced a Hall of Fame baseball player, and really, they've had very few, even all-star caliber players. So Neil and I, what we do in this episode is we take a closer look at all of the great baseball players to come out of the state since Bob Feller retired in 1956. And this was a fun episode because it brought back a lot of names that are famous here in the state of Iowa that are probably known to many of our listeners. Heck, you guys probably know these people personally or even related to a lot of them. So this was a lot of fun to do. And I'm sure we missed some guys here. So feel free to reach out and let us know who we missed. We love hearing from you guys each and every week. And if you like what we're doing here on the Moonlight Graham Show, we would love it if you subscribe to our podcast wherever it is that you get your podcast and left us a 5-star review. You can also, of course, follow the show on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We love hearing from you guys each and every week. Head on over to our website at moonlightgrahamshow.com. Check us out there as well. But enjoy today's episode where my brother Neil and I, we take a look at the greatest Iowa baseball players since the great Bob Feller. But before we get to our episode, I want to talk to you about a new partner of ours. It's called the Underdog Newsletter. So the Underdog Newsletter is an email newsletter that you can sign up for online. Here's what it is. It's a bite-sized rundown of the best underdog stories in sports. You guys know we're all about the underdogs here on the Moonlight Graham Show. And what these guys do, they sift through thousands of stories each and every week and handpick the best underdog stories and deliver them into your email inbox each and every week. They deliver it the same time the Moonlight Graham Show comes out every Tuesday morning. And these guys over at the Underdog Newsletter, they celebrate the long shots, the rejects, the misfits, beating the odds, and overcoming adversity. I don't know if there's a better email subscription list that you can sign up for than the Underdog Newsletter. Here's how you find them. You head over to www.jokermag.com/newsletter, or to make it even easier, all you have to do is type in Underdog Newsletter into Google, sign up for the Underdog Newsletter. It'll come into your inbox every Tuesday morning, and let them know the Moonlight Graham Show sent you. I guarantee that you'll enjoy this Underdog Newsletter each and every week. Check them out, guys. Today on the Moonlight Graham Show, we are talking about the greatest baseball players ever to come out of the state of Iowa after Bob Feller, who of course was the greatest baseball player ever to come out of the state of Iowa. With me today, making a triumphant return to the Moonlight Graham Show, is my brother Neil Flattery. Neil, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tim. I'm glad to be back.
It's been a long time.
I know. I think it's been a couple of years since I've been on.
And a lot's changed.
A lot's changed, and I feel like I've learned a few things, and I can be a good addition to the pod now.
So in the state of Iowa's history, there have been 222 people born in the state of Iowa to play in the major leagues. Of course, for today's episode, we're just going to be talking about the guys post-Bob Feller mostly. But, Neil, when you're looking through the 222 guys born in the state of Iowa that have played in the major leagues, what struck you?
You know, one thing I noticed right from the beginning when I was going through this list is most of these guys are from small towns. There's not a lot of guys from Des Moines area. I mean, there's a few from the Des Moines area, but Des Moines proper, I can only really think of Jeremy Hellickson.
Yeah.
Would be one of the more recent notable examples. And, of course, you have Joel Hanrahan, who's more of a Norwalk guy, and Tony Watson, who's from Grimes, and they're both kind of Des Moines area. But a lot of these guys are from small eastern Iowa towns like Norway and Lost Nation and, Bancroft.
Cedar Rapids had a bunch. Davenport, Burlington.
Right. Mm-hmm. And especially if we're not looking at the first half of the century, but if you look at the first half of the century, it's even more stark. It's all these guys are from really small towns. They're farm boys. I don't know how they even found these people
right.
back then.
The reason that we wanted to draw the line at Bob Feller is early in the 20th century, we've said it a couple of times already, there were so many great baseball players that came out of the state of Iowa. You look through the state, and you had Hall of Famers Cap Anson, Fred Clark, Dave Bancroft, Bob Feller, Red Faber. All those guys are Hall of Famers from the state of Iowa, and all of them played baseball in the first half of the 20th century, and we have not had a Hall of Famer since those guys. It's kind of stark, Neil.
Right, Tim. And a couple of guys I didn't even know. Like you had this guy named Earl Whitehill who played for the great Yankees teams of the 30s, and he was a great pitcher. Not a Hall of Famer, but probably in maybe the next tier of guys. He probably had close to 150 wins.
Yep, Bing Miller was in that category too. Like Bing Miller, I think had close to 2,000 hits. Played on some great Yankees team. He was on like almost the Murderers Row teams for the Yankees.
Right.
And so he had some really great players. But then Bob Feller, of course, retires in 1956. And since Bob Feller, we have not had a lot of great Major League Baseball players come out of Iowa. There's been a lot of them, but there have not been a lot of really great ones. And of course, for what we're talking about today, we're talking about like Iowans. We're not talking about just guys that were born in the state of Iowa but didn't grow up here, because of course you had guys like Jerry Hairston Jr. was born in Des Moines, but he didn't grow up in Iowa. Tim Laudner, who was a former Twins catcher, World Series champion, All-Star, went to the University of Missouri. He didn't grow up in Iowa. Kevin Tapani, Ken Anderson, Fred Stanley won 2 World Series with the Yankees in 77 and 78. He was born in Farnhamville, Iowa, but he didn't grow up here as well. Michael Walker is another guy that was born in Iowa, but is not considered an Iowan because he didn't grow up here. Joe McGrain is another one of those guys. So we're talking about the guys essentially that grew up in Iowa, went to high school in Iowa, and ended up playing in the major leagues. And what we're going to do for this episode is Neil and I are going to go back and forth, and we're going to draft a team. 5 starting pitchers, 2 relief pitchers, and 1 guy at every position, including DH, out of all of the guys from Iowa since 1956 to appear in the major leagues. Neil, you ready for this?
I'm ready to go, Tim.
So I guess before we draft our team, I did look up the all-time leaders from the state of Iowa. And of course, it's dominated mostly on the pitching side by Bob Feller. All of the Iowa records mostly are Bob Feller and Red Faber, both Hall of Famers. On the hitting side, it's mostly all Cap Anson. But if you look at the all-time WAR leader from Iowa, so wins above replacement, Cap Anson's WAR, Neil, was 94.28. To put that in perspective, Bob Feller's WAR was like 67. I think the average Major League Hall of Famer WAR is right around 60, in the low 60s. So for Cap Anson to have a WAR just under 95 is pretty incredible.
Right. I saw that too, and it was hard for me to put Bob Feller as my number 1 player when I saw that his WAR was so much less than Cap Anson, but you know, some of those stats in the late 1800s too were, it's hard to know how respectful to take them and that sort of thing.
Yeah, most home runs out of Iowa is Hal Trotsky, had 228. Most games played, of course, Cap Anson played in 2,524 games. Most saves, we already mentioned him, Joel Hanrahan from Norwalk. He's a modern guy. Most strikeouts by a hitter, Casey Blake, 1,037 strikeouts. The only Iowan ever to strike out more than 1,000 times in the major leagues was Casey Blake. Highest batting average of anybody from Iowa, Cody Eye and Don Eddy, both were 1 for 1 in their careers. So both of them had a batting average of 1,000. The first guy born in Iowa ever to appear in the major leagues was a guy by the name of Cal McVeigh. 5'10", 170 pounds from Montrose, Iowa, made his major league debut in 1871, actually had a career batting average of 346, led the league in hits twice. Cal McVeigh was the first Iowan ever in the major leagues. The last guy to be born in Iowa and appear in the major leagues, make his major league debut, was Derek Hill, who was born in Des Moines and made his debut on September 4th of 2020 with the Detroit Tigers. He went 1 for 11 in September of this season, 6'2", 190, Neil.
Where did he go to high school?
He was born here, but he did not. He grew up in San Diego. the San Diego area.
Gotcha.
Yep. The lowest WAR out of any Iowan ever is a guy by the name of Jack Hamilton. Jack Hamilton spent 8 seasons in the major leagues, originally from Burlington, Iowa, pitched from 1962 to 1969, appeared in 218 games, had a career strikeout-to-walk ratio of 357 strikeouts to 348 walks. And this guy pitched 8 seasons in the major leagues. His career WAR, the worst out of anyone ever from the state of Iowa, is negative 4.43. I honestly didn't know WAR could go that far down.
Wow, that's incredible.
Isn't it amazing? Like with advanced stats, no way Jack Hamilton.
How many years did he stick around?
8 years.
Wow.
He was on some good Mets teams. Like he was, 1962 to 69. They probably cut him right before the Miracle Mets in 1969. We've had 9 guys born in the state of Iowa manage games in the major leagues. The first was Cap Anson, of course, who had a ton of games. Dave Bancroft, another Hall of Famer. Fred Clark, another Hall of Famer. Then you had Jack Coombs, A.J. Hinch, who was born in Waverly, of course, but did not grow up here. Bruce Kim, former player and manager from Norway, Iowa. Bobby Maddock, Cal McVeigh, once again, and then John Waythen, all managed in the major league. So Iowa has had plenty of major league success through the years. Most of it happened in the first half of the 20th century. Today we're going to talk about the last essentially 70 years. You ready to go, Neil?
Let's do this, Tim.
All right, so let's start off with the pitching staff. We're going to select 5 starting pitchers from 1957 till today that have appeared in the major leagues that were raised in the state of Iowa. Neil, you have the first pick. Who are you going to pick?
I think this is an obvious choice, Tim. I'm going to go with Mike Botticker. Mike Botticker played, looks like 14 seasons, originally from Norway, Iowa, famous baseball town in Iowa.
Oh,
yeah. I have him on my number 1 baseball player from the state of Iowa, post Bob Feller. He had a really good career playing for the Orioles, the Red Sox, a couple of years with the Royals and the Brewers maybe. Had over 130 wins and was, above average pitcher for most of his career.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Botticker won the ALCS MVP in, I think, 1983. He also won the World Series with the Orioles in 83. He had an ERA title. He was a Gold Glover. Like Mike Botticker, like you said, he's the best Iowa baseball player since Bob Feller, which is incredible to think about.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I just met him, actually. I met Mike Botticker at the Field of Dreams last year, and he's right in our dad's era. I think our dad played against him. Botticker, of course, went to the University of Iowa, and they overlapped for a couple of years, and Botticker and our dad played against each other. So it was cool to see Dad and Mike Botticker at the Field of Dreams last year. So I got the second pick. In my second pick, I'm going to pick Stan Bonson. And so Stan Bonson is a guy that, honestly, I had never heard of up until 2 years ago when we did the top 100 athletes out of the state of Iowa. Stan Bonson's from Council Bluffs. He pitched in the 70s and 80s, had 146 career wins. He had 20 saves, a career ERA of 3.60. He actually appeared in the major leagues from 1966 to 1982, had a really great career, and he's an Iowan, Neil, that I had never heard of growing up.
I know. I hadn't either until we started putting together these lists, and I was like, he actually had more career wins than Mike Botticker had.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he had 20 saves to boot. Like he spent, 16, 17 years in the major leagues. He had a hell of a career, and I'm surprised we don't hear the name Stan. I mean, it's one of those things when, I guess, in Council Bluffs, it's almost like it's not really Iowa. It's right on the border there.
Yeah.
So, he's probably famous in Omaha.
There's a lot of Huskers fans in Council Bluffs.
Right. All right, Neil, you got the next pick. Who's your second starting pitcher?
So I'm going to go with John Lieber.
Yeah.
John Lieber's a guy, more recent guy, also from Council Bluffs. And I remember watching him pitch a lot growing up, and I kind of maybe knew he was from Iowa, but I never really thought of him as an Iowan until, going through this stuff, and I was like, oh, wow, he's a native Iowan. He had a, really solid career.
Yeah, he was an all-star.
Yeah, very similar stats to, Mike Botticker. Didn't necessarily have maybe the star power that Botticker had. Didn't play quite as many years maybe, but
Lieber played for the Cubs, played for the Yankees, so like he was on TV. People knew who John Lieber was.
Right. Yeah, he probably made some good money too while he played.
Right.
Yeah, Lieber, good pick. So my next one is another, kind of famous Iowa guy, Jeremy Hellickson. Jeremy Hellickson is my second pick from Des Moines, Iowa, of course. He's right around my age. 76 and 75 was his career record. Career ERA of 4.13. Won the Rookie of the Year for the Tampa Bay Rays. Also won a Gold Glove, just like Botticker did. And it's kind of surprising, Neil, when you look at like Stan Bonson is a guy that I've never heard of, and he almost had double the wins that Jeremy Hellickson had. And Jeremy Hellickson, of course, is more of a name than Bonson is, but Bonson had a way better career than Hellickson did.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show that, like, maybe being from Des Moines or, the modern social media and modern contracts, there's more star power now than there was 20, 30 years before that.
Well, I feel like Hellickson, too, his first 2 or 3 years were really good.
Really good.
And those were his best years, too.
It's surprising to see that he only won 76 games.
Yeah.
Because it seems like he was, a top 3 in the rotation starter for a good 5-year period. But, in like 10 years in the major leagues, he only had 76 wins.
Right. He wasn't on a lot of good teams, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, he was on those. He came up
Rays
with those
teams.
Dave Price, James Shields, Rays teams that were really, really good.
Yeah.
Who's your next pick, Neil?
All right, I'm going to go with Cal Eldrid for my next pick. Very popular name, especially if you're from Eastern Iowa. I remember listening.
Current pitching coach for the Royals.
Right. He's from Urbana originally. I listened to him on the radio a bunch when I was living in Iowa City. Seems like a good guy. He could help, teach and coach some of my other staff guys on the in my pitching rotation too.
He's a clubhouse guy.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, he actually won 86 games. I mean, he was 86 and 74, so his win-loss is better than Hellickson's actually, but he doesn't really have the name recognition. I guess he does, but it seems like Hellickson would have had a better career than Cal Eldrid. But when you look at the numbers, it's not so much the case.
Right. Yeah. No, I have Eldrid ranked above Hellickson.
You did
on my list, yeah. But yeah, their stats are pretty similar.
All right. Can you grab me another beer there before I make my next pick, Neil? So you picked Eldrid. My next pick is one of the older guys on my list. It's actually a guy by the name of Jimmy McAndrew. Jimmy McAndrew is from Lost Nation, Iowa, Neil. Jim McAndrew had a career win-loss of 37 wins and 53 losses, but his ERA was 3.65, and he was on the 1969 Miracle Mets team. So he won a World Series with the 1969 Mets, and, he's just a winner. He's a winner. So he pitched right in that pitcher's era when nobody was giving up runs in the late 60s, which probably helps his ERA here, even though he didn't win a ton of games. But my number 3 guy in the rotation is Jim McAndrew from Lost Nation.
I mentioned this Lost Nation town keeps coming up, and they've produced a lot of good baseball players I've seen on this list, and I kind of want to know what's going on with the name of their city too. So if anyone knows why it's named Lost Nation, please let me know.
Yeah, does it have something to do probably with the Indian tribes?
Yeah, maybe. Did they all?
Is this just a really depressing name for a tribe of Indians
that were originally there and then they moved away, or so, I don't know.
Or they just settled there and then they were just lost, like a nation of Indians?
Right. Yeah. Maybe they.
I hope that's not the case.
I do too. All right. So I'm up next. So I'm gonna go with Joe Decker. He's my next pick. Born in Storm Lake, Iowa, raised in Sioux Rapids, Iowa. So Northwest Iowa guy. Good guy. He pitched.
He's a good guy.
Pitched, looks like 8 years in the majors for the Cubs, for the Twins, for the Seattle Mariners. I don't know if it was the Mariners or the Pilots back then. I think it was the Mariners when he pitched. He had a decent career. He won 16 games in 1974.
I saw that for the Twins. You went
for the Twins.
14 for the Twins.
Yeah. So I think I got a good guy off my pick.
That's your number 4 starter?
That's
right?
my number 4. Yeah.
So my number 4 starter is a guy that I feel kind of connected with because he played for the same high school baseball coach that I played for, and he went to the same college as our dad, and that's Don Wenger from Sioux City, Iowa. Don Wenger was a Sioux City Heelan guy, and our high school baseball coach, Joe Shanks, coached Don Wenger in high school. Then Don Wenger went to Iowa State. He's the all-time wins leader at Iowa State. Our dad is the all-time strikeout leader at Iowa State. Don Wenger, didn't have a great major league career if you look at the numbers, but he did have a lot of major league time. And he was 14-32 with a 6.01 ERA. But you got to remember, Wenger was pitching in the steroid era. So there were a lot of inflated ERAs in the steroid era here. But he's going to be my number 4 starter. I think Wenger is going to give me 6 solid innings every 5th day.
All right, if you say so, Tim. For my next pick, for my 5th starter, I'm going to go with a guy by the name of Jackie Collum. Pitched in the late 50s into the 60s. I don't have a whole lot of notes on him. I just have that he stuck around a while. And played for about 6 different teams from Victor, Iowa.
What's funny is there are quite a few good pitchers that come out of Iowa, but we get to the bottom of the barrel pretty quick here, and I mean no offense to anybody that's on this list here. My 5th starter, I'm going to go with a moonlighter here, Neil. So my 5th and final pick, another great clubhouse guy. I'm going with Colin Ray. Colin Ray from Cascade, Iowa. Actually, he's from a small town. He's from Bernard, Iowa, right outside. It's a suburb of Cascade. So Colin Ray from Cascade, Iowa, career record of 8-8 with a 4.79. But
that's decent.
We've seen that he can go from the bullpen to being your 5th starter, and he can be one of those flex guys, and I really like that flexibility in my staff. So I'm going to go with Colin Ray. Some other guys that I considered for that 5th starter spot, Mitch Keller, young guy right now, who's up in the big leagues. He's actually the second to last Iowa guy to make his debut. Wes Obermiller from Iowa City was another guy I thought of. Neil, what other guys were you considering for your starting rotation?
Jackie was my last guy. And so
that was the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, I'm really glad you didn't pick him because I didn't have anyone else.
So let's move to the bullpen. We're each going to select 2 bullpen arms before we start getting into the hitters. Neil, who's your first bullpen arm? There's a lot of good bullpen arms from Iowa.
Right.
Yeah.
We've produced a lot of good relievers, especially after Bob Feller. For my first pick, I'm going to go off a moonlighter too. I'm going to go with Tony Watson. Current guy. He's had a very good career. I'm looking at his career stats right now. He has got a 1.39 ERA plus. So for the course of his career, he's been a really solid late inning reliever for a lot of good Pirates teams, Dodgers and Giants. So I think I got a pretty good reliever in Tony Watson.
Yeah, Watson's ERA this year, and the Giants were right into it until the last day of the regular season, and his ERA was like 1.8 this season. He's one of those guys that, he's going to keep playing because he's going to keep getting people out. My first pick out of the bullpen is a guy that I really like. He's got a World Series ring. A guy by the name of Bob Locker. Bob Locker from George, Iowa, had a career record of 57-39 with a career ERA of 2.25. Had a ton of saves. I think he had like 98 career saves, Neil. Won a World Series with the 72 Oakland A's. I mean, this guy was a fantastic reliever, and frankly, until I started looking up these stats, I had never heard of the guy. But Bob Locker is my go-to guy to the bullpen.
From George, Iowa.
I'd never heard of George, Iowa.
Don't know where that is.
Farming community, I'm assuming.
I'm assuming, too.
Probably got a good Catholic church there.
That's true. All right, for my next pick, I'm going to go with a guy by the name of Eddie Watt.
Ooh.
Southern Iowa guy, born in Lamoni. It looks like he was raised in Iowa City. Had a really good career. 2.91 ERA for his career. Picked up 80 saves. I think he played at University of Iowa as well. Played for 10 seasons. Really solid career.
Eddie Watt. So my last pick out of the bullpen then is the guy with the most saves ever from the state of Iowa, and that's Joel Hanrahan from Norwalk. 100 career saves, 3.85 ERA. But what I thought was interesting of Hanrahan, his WAR was only 4.34, whereas Tony Watson's WAR was like 11.87, so it's 3 times higher essentially than Hanrahan's. But the guy had 100 saves. He was an all-star, threw 100 miles an hour. I think I'm going to be okay with Bob Locker and Joel Hanrahan in my bullpen.
Those are some good picks, Tim.
Did you have anybody else? Who else was on your relievers list?
Okay, I had a couple other guys on here. I had a guy by the name of Tom Hilgendorf from Clinton, Iowa. He played for about 10 seasons over there. In his last year in the league, and I don't know how this was his last year. He had his best year when he was about 33 or 34. Had a 7-3 record of a 2.14 ERA. Pretty good career from him.
Nice. I also had Joe Horner from Dubuque. Joe Horner had 98 career saves, 39-34 record with a 2.99 ERA. He was an All-Star and won the World Series in 1967.
Yeah, I had him on my list too. I had him above Eddie Watt. I should have probably picked him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, you didn't. You picked Eddie Watt instead. So, now moving on to the hitters. So we've had a ton of good pitchers. Obviously, a lot of those pitchers that we just selected are guys that you've heard of before. On the other side of this, after Bob Feller, there were no Cap Ansons. There were no Fred Clarks. There were no really great hitters that have come out of the state of Iowa over the last 70 years, Neil. It's kind of sad. And so some of these guys, as we're going through these positions, we're selecting guys that have played like less than 20 games in the major leagues. But we're going to start off with the catcher position. And we're going to select a guy at every position. Neil, kick it off with the catcher position. Who is your go-to guy for the catchers?
Okay, for my catcher, and there were a few good solid catchers from Iowa.
Yeah, there's been a lot of good catchers from Iowa.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with a guy by the name of Jerry McNerney.
Ooh.
Played in the 60s into the 70s from Boone. Played for the White Sox, the Seattle Pilots, Brewers, Cardinals, Pittsburgh. Batted .289 in 1971. Yeah, I think I got a pretty good, decent pick in him.
Yeah, McNerney was a good player. He was born in Boone, but he went to Gilbert High School, and that Jerry McNerney name is just like a really good mid-century American name, isn't it?
It definitely is, yeah.
So my catcher is going to be John Waythen. So John Waythen is from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and he actually played all 10 years of his major league career with the Royals. He won a World Series with the Royals in 1985. He later went on to manage the Royals for 6 seasons, had a winning record as a manager. A really good backup catcher guy that had some really great years with the Royals. Probably best friends with George Brett, and that's the type of guy that I want on my team and handling my pitching staff. So Waythen's my guy.
Good clubhouse guy.
Good clubhouse guy. First base, Neil. Who's your pick?
All right, for this one, can I go with Casey Blake?
Ooh. You're moving Blake across the diamond.
Well, yeah, because, Casey Blake is one of the most solid position players we have to choose from. And to tell you the truth, there aren't a lot of good first basemen. So I think I'm going to pick Casey Blake to fill this one. If you are a listener of this podcast, you know who Casey Blake is.
He's a moonlighter.
Moonlighter from Indianola. He's when I think of Casey Blake, I kind of think of him kind of as a Twins killer. Played against the Twins a lot on those Indians teams in the 2000s with Travis Hafner. Kind of a utility guy. Played all around the diamond. Had a really solid career, over 1,100 hits. Above average hitter for the course of his career.
Yeah, Casey Blake had 167 home runs, 264 doubles. He's obviously the best hitter to come out of Iowa. Well, I don't know. It's him and another guy we'll mention later are kind of the two guys that have been the best hitters. But Casey Blake, I'm surprised you're moving him from third base to first base is my surprise.
Okay, I don't have a lot of good.
Okay. My first baseman that I'm going to go with is another moonlighter, and this just no offense to Todd Sears, but this is kind of shows how shallow the pool is right now. So Todd Sears, played in the major leagues in both 2002 and 2003. Great hitter, great guy, but he just didn't have a ton of time in the major leagues. His career slash line was .259, .319 on base percentage with a slugging of .388. Went 2 for 3 off of Pedro Martinez, maybe one of the top 2 or 3 best modern day pitchers we've ever seen. So I want Todd Sears right there, the big left-handed bat, playing first base for me. He's my pick, Neil.
All right, that's a good pick. I liked his interview with Andy on the show, too.
So second base, who do you got there?
All right, for second base, I'm going to go with the guy that I ranked as the second best player who's played in the majors from Iowa since Bob Feller, a guy by the name of Dennis Menke. He's a guy from Bancroft, Iowa, up in Kossuth County.
Went to Bancroft St. John's.
Played at that famous ball diamond they have up there.
Yep, still being used.
Yep. Had over 1,200 hits, solid middle infielder, played for the Braves, the Astros, the Reds.
Two-time All-Star.
Really solid career.
The thing about Dennis Menke, he wasn't a big guy. He's like one of these kind of classic middle infielders of, the 20th century before like guys like Cal Ripken and A-Rod kind of reinvented that position. But he did have over 100 career home runs and a career on-base percentage of .343, which was a little, it's not like Hall of Fame worthy, but that's better than I was anticipating his OBP to be.
Right. Yeah, good career.
So my second baseman is going to be Gene Baker. So Gene Baker, actually, unfortunately, he's like the only African-American guy that I have on my list. There haven't been a lot of black guys to come out of the state of Iowa and play in the major leagues, unfortunately. But Gene Baker is my second baseman. He's from Davenport, Iowa. Played in the bigs from 1953 to 1961. He was an all-star with the Cubs in 1955. Had over 100 career doubles. And so Gene Baker is my second baseman, Neil.
Good pick. I wanted to have Baker on my team, but you got him.
I'm curious as to who your shortstop's going to be if you're moving Dennis Menke to second base and Casey Blake to first base. So who's your shortstop?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out right now, too. I think I'm going to go with a guy by the name of Steve Macko. He played a couple years for the Cubs. Didn't get a whole lot of playing time. But
Steve Macko is your shortstop.
Yeah, Steve Macko.
Steve Macko. All right.
Steve Macko.
So I'm going to go with Jack Dittmer is going to be my shortstop. So Jack Dittmer, he's no Gene Baker, he's no Dennis Menke, but he did play 395 games in the major leagues from 1952 to 1957. Get this. His career slash line, Neil, is .232, .280, .333. He had a slugging percentage of .333. So he's nothing to brag about, but I think he's better than Macko, your starting shortstop.
I like Macko. Good clubhouse guy.
So who's your third baseman?
Okay, so I have Fred Stanley on here.
No, Fred Stanley does not count. He moved away. He did not grow up in Iowa. Yeah, I'm not going to accept Fred Stanley. Fred Stanley, I think, was the last, or Fred Stanley won 2 World Series with the Yankees in 1977 and 78, and has kind of become, a low-key famous Yankee guy because he was a good clubhouse guy, but he did not grow up in the state of Iowa.
Okay, that throws me off a loop. So, what about Jeff Clement? Can I put Jeff Clement there, or does he was more first base, DH, pinch hitter, catcher?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could put Jeff Clement there, but I don't think he ever played third base in a game. But you can. I'll accept it. He grew up in the state of Iowa, of course.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Jeff Clement. I know he's not a natural third baseman, but I think we can teach him how to play the position. When I think of him, great high school player.
All-time national leader in home runs.
National leader in home runs. His pro career didn't really pan out like maybe we were hoping it would.
Right.
But he played a few seasons.
He played from 2007 to 2012, had 14 career home runs, 84 career hits, had a career slash line of 218, 277, 371. So, this guy won the Golden Spikes Award out of USC in college, was a top 5 draft pick in the major leagues. He had a lot of huge expectations. He was like a Joe Mauer type of guy coming out of USC, and he never quite lived up to expectations. But he's going to be playing. Maybe if he's moving to third base, maybe that's the answer, Neil.
I think so too. Yeah.
So my third baseman is going to be kind of cut from the same mold as Jeff Clement, another famous Iowa high school player that was a very accomplished college baseball player. His name is Matt McCree, another moonlighter, of course, was the Big East Player of the Year at Notre Dame. Played shortstop in college. Was the Player of the Year as a shortstop. Made it up with the Twins. Had a career slash line, Neil, 324, 361, 441, but he just didn't get enough chances. I think if I put him in at third base, he's going to really shine for me there. He's the guy I like. So Matt McCree is my third baseman.
I still like Macko in my infield, though.
So let's move to the outfield. A couple other guys that I had listed in my infield were Dick Kenworthy from Red Oak, Iowa. Played 125 games from 1962 to 1968. Hit 4 home runs in 1967. And then I had, Dwayne Josephson was a guy behind the dish that I liked a lot. Was an All-Star in 1968 from New Hampton, Iowa. Caught 470 games. So, Dwayne Josephson was also a guy I considered from behind the plate. Neil, was there anybody else you were considering in the infield?
No, I pretty much, that was pretty much everyone.
All right, let's move to the outfield then. And if you thought the infield was thin, wait till you get to the outfield. So, Neil, who's your first pick for the outfield?
Okay, I'm going to go with, one of the better picks we have here from Cedar Rapids, Ryan Sweeney.
Yes.
He had a really good career, played, a guy that probably a lot of you guys recognize the name at least. 276 career batting average, played almost 10 seasons with the White Sox, the A's, the Red Sox, the Cubs. You never really, I don't think of him as a full-time starter necessarily for most of his career, but definitely when he got a chance to play, he put up some decent numbers.
Injuries kind of hurt Sweeney. He was a second-round pick. I mean, this guy could run like it. He had it all. Mm-hmm. He was like a Max Kepler type of guy, built like Kepler, could run like Kepler, that kind of same build and profile, that projection, but injuries kept him down. Neil, I don't know if you know this, but one of my only career home runs was off of Ryan Sweeney.
I think I remember you saying that, like in Little League or something.
Yeah, in like the state baseball tournament when I was 6th grade or whatever, he was like 6'4", throwing 100 miles an hour, and I closed my eyes and hit one out of the park on Ryan Sweeney when he played for, I think the Cedar Rapids Reds or the Cedar Rapids Power Train, one of those teams. Everybody knew that guy was going to be a major leaguer when he was like in 6th grade. He was that good. My pick is another moonlighter, is Scott Schebler from Cedar Rapids or Iowa. Neil, what town is he? Isn't he from a little town outside of Cedar Rapids?
Yeah, he's from, I think, Shoeyville.
He's from Shoeyville, Iowa. You're right.
Yeah, which is just south of Cedar Rapids Prairie School District. Bar there is named Shoey's. That's about all I know about Shoeyville.
Yeah, so I'm going to take Schebler. I mean, Schebler is the only Iowan ever to hit over 30 home runs in a year here. So this is not a bad pick at all. He hit 30 home runs with the Reds in 2017. He's still in the major leagues. Right now in the Braves organization, made an appearance with the Braves. He's in their kind of alternate site right now, staying active during the playoffs. So I'm taking Schebler as my first outfielder, Neil.
That's a good pick, Tim. For my second outfielder, those were, I think, the top 2 outfielders pretty clearly. So for my next pick, I'm going to go with a guy who actually played quite a few years in the majors. His name is Larry Bittner. Pocahontas native. I think he still lives in Pocahontas.
He does.
Yeah. And, the thing that struck me, and we were talking about him earlier, is, he had a really good batting average just by looking at, if you look at just his numbers at face value, he had a 273 career batting average, 30 homers over the course of he played 14 seasons, but, they're more that, the newer analytics don't quite look as fondly over his career, but if you stick around in the majors for 13, 14 seasons, you have to be pretty good.
Yeah, he was a left-handed hitter, had a really good season with the Cubs, had a really good season with the Expos, and I think he's in the top 15 in Major League history for the most pinch hits. And so Larry Bittner is one of those guys that had a real value to the game in like the 1970s. And actually, I interviewed Larry Bittner, not for the podcast, but for a baseball event up in Pocahontas a couple years ago. And he told a great story about Ted Williams. When Larry Bittner got to the major leagues, his first manager was Ted Williams. And they were playing, I think, for the Colt 45s, the Houston Colt 45s. and they were visiting the Red Sox. And, of course, Ted Williams, the greatest player ever to play for the Red Sox, it was a big deal when Williams came back to Fenway. And so when he goes up at batting practice, all of the fans and the other players wanted Ted Williams to step into the cage. And so Ted Williams stepped into the cage at like 50 years old. And Larry Bittner said he put on an absolute clinic at 50 years old, and he hit like 15 straight balls around pesky pole for home runs at Fenway Park. And he just said, even at 50 years old, he thought Ted Williams could hit 350 in the major leagues. He said he's the greatest hitter he ever saw.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's cool. So Bittner, I think that's a good pick, Neil. My second pick, and we're getting pretty thin here, so my second pick in the outfield, I'm going to have him play center field. He's got good wheels. From Des Moines, Iowa, actually probably West Des Moines, Dowling Catholic, Scott Pose. So Scott Pose played for the Royals. He played for the Yankees even in 1997. So he played with Jeter and Rivera and, you know, all of those great players for the Yankees. Played 202 career games in the major leagues. Only had 75 career hits. Actually had a negative WAR. Career batting average of 240. On-base percentage of 321. Career slugging of 268. So figure that one out. Not a lot of pop from Pose, but I think he plays a really good center field. And if you're going to play in a big ballpark like I am here, you're going to need a great center fielder like Scott Pose.
I like that pick, Tim. So, yeah, for my final outfielder, you know, I actually don't know a lot about this guy. But, you know, he got a couple cups of coffee in the majors. His name's Corey Dehaan.
Oh, yeah.
A guy I had never heard of before. He's an alumnus of Morningside in Sioux City. He played for the Padres in 2000 and 2002. Career 193 hitter. But, you know, he's currently the batting coach for a minor league team in Bradenton, Florida. So I think he can, like I said,
he knows his stuff.
He knows how to hit. He just got to put it into action.
So Corey Dehaan from Pella, Iowa, I looked him up earlier, Neil. He was a 7th round draft pick out of Morningside. I mean, he must have had quite the career at Morningside to be a 7th round draft pick. You know, I mean, that's crazy. Like, if the University of Iowa had a 7th round draft pick this year, it'd be a big deal. For Morningside to have a 7th round draft pick, that's like unheard of.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, I mean, Corey Dehaan, the guy must have been able to really play. My last outfielder is actually a guy that never played an inning in the outfield in the major leagues, but he was a two-sport All-American at Iowa State University, the all-time home run leader at Iowa State, drafted in 2 sports. He's a moonlighter, and he's Mike Bush. And I think because he was, you know, played multiple sports, I think he could have played like right field, like Adam Dunn played right field. You know, Mike Bush was like 6'5", 240 pounds, so I think that guy could have played right field or left field, and he was a good enough athlete to do that. He was actually the first guy to cross the picket line in the strike in '94. That's kind of what he's famous for. He came up with the Dodgers, had hit 7 home runs for the Dodgers, made some good money, played some good years over in Korea and Japan after that. So I think Mike Bush can play the outfield. Mike Bush, of course, is from Donahoe, Iowa. We all know that. And he's going to round out my outfield. Neil, what other guys, were you considering any other guys for your outfield spots?
You know, now I kind of wanted to use, I think I should have used Bush for my third base pick, but, you know, a couple other guys, I didn't really have much else to go off of, unless there's a couple other guys, infielders and catchers that I was thinking about maybe moving to the outfield, but I may get to them later as my DH pick.
All right, so who is your DH pick? We're already to the DH.
Yeah, so for my DH pick, I'm just going to go with the best position player I have left on the board, and it's a guy we've mentioned already. His name's Dwayne Josephson.
New Hampton
guy, and typically, you know, you don't want to DH your catcher, your backup catcher, but in this instance, I think it'll work for fantasy. This is a guy who played 8 seasons in the majors with the White Sox and the Red Sox. You know, you mentioned already he was a one-time All-Star. You know, really a decent career behind the dish. He could hit a little bit, so I think it'll work as my DH.
So my DH is going to be another catcher, which just shows the depth of catchers that come out of the state of Iowa. Mine is Bruce Kim. So Bruce Kim, future iCubs manager, future Chicago Cubs manager, played in the major leagues. He's originally from Norway, Iowa, of course. Played in the major leagues from 1976 to 1980. Most famously, was kind of the personal catcher for Mark the Bird Fidrich during Fidrich's great years for the Detroit Tigers there. So he's a great clubhouse guy. I need more guys like that on the field. He played for Detroit, Chicago Cubs, and Chicago White Sox. Not a great hitter. Career slash line of 237, 290, 292. So he's not a great hitter, but we're kind of getting to the bottom of the barrel here, and that's why we wanted to draw the line for this at Bob Feller, because it's striking to me that there's just not more great all-star caliber players from the state of Iowa over the last 70 years.
Right.
We need more of them.
We need more of them, Tim. Yeah, like you said, the best guy is Mike Botticker, and he's not Hall of Fame worthy. He was an all-star.
But people know Mike Botticker.
People know Mike Botticker.
Regular baseball fans know the name Mike Botticker. I don't think regular baseball fans know the name Scott Pose.
No,
he's like our second outfielder.
Right.
And that's kind of sad. Like, the outfield position should be stacked, and we're picking guys like Corey Dehaan. No offense, Corey Dehaan, like, you're a moonlighter and we love you, but he played like 4 games in the major leagues.
Yeah, would this be typical of other states? It's very pitcher heavy. Most of the guys who make the majors are probably pitchers.
Right.
Relief pitchers, but we do have some solid pitchers that you would recognize, Hellickson and Tony Watson as current guys, but not a lot of position players other than Casey Blake. Baseball fans would recognize Casey Blake.
Yeah. Yep, and probably a lot of people know Dennis Menke. If he made 2 all-star teams back in the 70s, like, he's probably a guy that people remember. But we also there was a lot of good pitchers. Like, the pitcher depth was pretty good. You had guys like Matt Dermody, who played for, the Cubs this season. And there's more guys like that I think on the pitching side than there is on the hitting side. There is not a whole lot of hitters, even like Derek Hill, who made his debut this year. He didn't grow up in Iowa. And if you start to make that distinction, when's the last time a guy born and raised from the state of Iowa, had a good career as a hitter in the major leagues? You had guys like Matt McCree and Todd Sears who were like big deals, but didn't have long MLB careers.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I know. I mean, you could put a decent bullpen together with this roster and a decent starting rotation.
Yeah. Yep.
The infield would be okay.
Yeah, if we're doing like an all-star infield, I think I have Casey Blake at third, Menke at second, Gene Baker I'd have Blake at third, Menke at short, Gene Baker at second. All those guys were solid. And then first base, you're throwing like a Todd Sears or a Jeff Clement there, or a Mike Bush maybe. So that's an okay infield. It's at least replacement level.
But then the outfield, you got Sweeney, Schebler, and probably Bittner.
And Bittner in the outfield. Yeah. And that's not replacement.
And none of those guys have, done. I guess Bittner was a starter for his career.
Right.
For most of his career. But he had a negative WAR for his career.
Yep. Yeah, so it's not great. The most depth is at the catching position as far as the position players go. You had Waythen, Dwayne Josephson, McNertney, Bruce Kim, Mike Mahoney, Craig Colbert. Like, all of those guys, were serviceable backups or starters at one point in their career.
Yeah, and you got Steve Macko at short, too.
So, I guess right now, the number one or two prospects in the country for high school baseball players is this Ian Moeller out of Dubuque, Iowa. And it'd be great to see a guy like that make the major leagues.
Right.
And this Ian Moeller is not even playing high school baseball. He's only doing the showcase circuit and everything. But it'd be great to see him make the major leagues, because we have not had a great hitter since Casey Blake. And before that, it was
Menke.
And before that, it was, Hall of Famer caliber guys.
Yeah.
So we need Ian Moeller to a lot of pressure on a 17-year-old kid. but I think he can do it.
Yeah, and maybe Schebler can turn it around and get back to
right.
I think this year he was kind of up and down a little bit, mostly down, but he strung together a couple good months there for the Reds. But you'd like to see him kind of come back and put it together next season.
Yeah, it'd be great to see Shebler get to that 20 homer, 30 homer area again next year, because like I said, it was just 3 years ago he hit 30 home runs for the Reds.
Right. Mm-hmm. He's probably not going to find much on that Braves roster though. Many openings there.
No. Yeah, he needs the right spot. He'd probably. Well, I guess the NL has a DH now.
Yeah.
But he needs to go to a team. I mean, hell, if Schebler would have been on the Marlins this year, Schebler would have played 40 games.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Braves have a lot better roster than the Marlins, so he needs the right situation.
Yeah. He needs to go to the Tigers or the Marlins or somewhere like
that.
Yeah,
one of these rebuilding teams.
Yeah.
To get his second chance. Good point, Neil. Well.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me back, Tim. I'm hoping this one turns out okay. Yeah, Macko, I think we may need to look him up because it looks like he may have moved to Texas when he was young, but if that's the case, I'll try to find another shortstop.
Do you think this is our highest rated pod ever?
I think it might be, yeah.
If anyone is still listening at this point of the podcast, let us know. I'd really tweet at us or send us a Facebook message or something if you made it this far, and tell us what you thought about Neil's return to the pod.
Hey guys, thanks once again to listening to today's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show. And even though I do most of the interviews here on the podcast, there is a ton of work that happens behind the scenes that you guys don't see that make each episode possible. So I got to give a shout out to the Moonlight Graham Show team. First of all, Brian Sandvig, our producer. Brian does all of the post-production work, and in real life, he's not just a podcast producer, he's also a real estate agent. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home down in the Kansas or Missouri areas, give Brian Sandvig a call. Next guy on that list is Brendan Gargano. Brendan does all of our design and artwork here on the podcast. He's one of the most talented artists I've ever met, and I love all of his work. If you need any help on the design side with logos or anything like that, give Brendan Gargano a call. The next guy on that list is Andy Flattery, my older brother. Andy, of course, has done some of the interviews here on the podcast. He also is a certified financial planner. He owns a business called Simple Wealth Planning. If you need any help in that area, check Andy Flattery out. And then, of course, the trusty co-host Tom Griffin and my younger brother Neil Flattery. Those guys are just busy being husbands, being fathers, they're family men, but also they do a ton of work here on the show. So thanks again for listening. We really appreciate you guys subscribing and supporting the Moonlight Graham Show.